we're not in the trauma Olympics here, air quotes around that, right? Like, don't
Right.
compare your situation to others because your story is your story and it matters. It always matters. And so, find the pace and the peace of that and hopefully some solace. And then don't stay in isolation because there's lots of support out there.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. So, what comes to mind when you hear the word adoption? For many, it's a simple snapshot: a loving family, a child welcomed home, and happily ever after. But as with any photograph, there's always more to the story behind the frame. Our guest today is on a mission to expand that picture. Jean Widner, an adoptee and author of the award-winning book, The Adoption Paradox. She's here to share her compelling personal adoption story and shine a light on the often unspoken complexities that adoptees carry through life. So, Jean, it's a pleasure to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Danielle.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So, stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course. I think that you have such a compelling story to tell us. And I just have to say, it takes a lot of strength to take such personal experiences and put it into a book and share it with the world. So, that strength is very admirable.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I'm wondering if you'd like to we'll talk about you a little bit here. I mean, of course, the big question here is your adoption story, right? So what was it like growing up as an adoptee, and ultimately what made you decide that you had to put it into a book?
Sure. I have pretty much what would be called the quintessential adoption story from a person of my age. I was born in 1965. My first natural mother or birth mother, she was an unwed 18-year-old young woman. And so therefore our society at that point was, not accepting of unwed single mothers. Her boyfriend apparently wouldn't or couldn't, support them or was unable or unwilling to marry. And so she ended up in a circumstance where she was basically sort of culturally pushed into relinquishing me to adoption. And there was a lot of that happening back then. So I was born, I was placed in foster care for about 2 months, and then adopted more or less at birth and raised in Yakima, Washington by two loving and well-educated and financially stable parents who adored me, George and Marion Kelly. Um, I grew up, and for all practical purposes, everything was normal and happy. Um, to look at us from the outside, we were a picture perfect family. I was an only child, and you know, there were unfortunately some issues in that, my mother unfortunately was addicted to prescription drugs and alcohol. And so that certainly had an effect on me and us and our relationship when I was growing up. She did get clean and sober when I was a teenager, and so that was a good thing. Obviously, that was good for her spiritually, physically, psychologically, and also good for me.
Right.
Um, but of course, a lot of damage had been done, and I pretty much wandered all the way into adulthood saying, yeah, we had some issues as a family, but adoption certainly wasn't them. Adoption had never affected me.
Right, understood. Well, I'm glad that it kind of worked out very well in the fact that you had a loving family, and that even though there were road bumps that were challenging to overcome, you had a, you know, very nice, outcome in a way. I mean, here you are now. But I know it's not something that everybody's able, it's a very lucky, I guess you could say. There's so much more unfortunate stories out there, I can only imagine. So I guess that's kind of why you might have decided to interview nearly 100 people for the book. I'm kind of to get those other perspectives on what it was like. Is that kind of what the reasoning was behind it?
Well, okay, let me back up, I guess, and
Okay.
and go to like the actual impetus. So in 2020, right, the year we were all shut down, um, my parents, my adopted parents by that point were both gone, and it was Thanksgiving. And I remember I had done one of those ancestry DNA tests ages ago, didn't really think much of it, whatever. There'd never been any really close matches. And sure enough, up pops a more close, like second to third cousin match. And so I start going in there and I log in for the first time in, like I said, literally years. And I realize I have several second and third cousin matches. And I realized that they're actually also not a part of the same family tree. And I realized I've
Hmm.
got both paternal and maternal matches in here. Now that's interesting. And we were sitting around, that Thanksgiving weekend, me and my husband and my mother-in-law. And that's really all there is left of our family. We never had children. My husband and I made that decision a long time ago. I have no siblings. He has no living siblings. And so it really is down to just us. And my husband looks at me and he says, Babe, if you're even thinking about looking for your birth parents, you had better get after it because nobody in this scenario is getting any younger. He's like, your mom would be what, in her 70s now? And I went, you're right. And so I was born in Washington State, which is one of the few states where it's relatively easy for me to get my original birth certificate. So I sent away for that and received it, and we found my birth mother relatively quickly. And so, but in the meantime and in the interim, I started to do some additional research and some additional reading. I found a book called The Girls Who Went Away, written by Anne Fessler, which focuses on the women of my mother's era, which has a name. It's called the Baby Scoop era. In between World War II and 1973, there were more adoptions than at any other time in history. And that's true not only in the US, but worldwide. And so, because again, we had a baby boom overall, right? After World War II. And then we still had a culture, though, that was absolutely not going to accept single parenthood. And so you had more relinquishments, unfortunately, than you had at any other time. So I read that book, and it was one thing to know that my mother may have not had the same choices that I did, coming of age in the 1980s. It was another thing to face how some of those women were treated. And so I sat there and was pondering some of the other things I had personally started writing a lot more than I ever had in the past, and own a little news blog here in my small town where I live, and started talking that through and decided that I wanted to write a book. And I was very inspired by that one that I just mentioned, The Girls Who Went Away, because it combined storytelling with significant research. But what I realized is that there really wasn't a book out there that was tackling adoption from all three sides. There were memoirs and some really wonderful books by adoptees. There were some memoirs that were starting to come out on the market from birth or first mothers. And of course, lots of books written by adoptive parents, but there really wasn't one that combined all of them. And so that's really what got my jets revved, is the idea of combining research and storytelling and letting each side have their say, because I felt like that was really important.
Absolutely. Well, that's very interesting that you kind of found a need and you filled it, right? There's no books out there exactly like this. And you decided, you know what? It's time for me to write this book because you're able to, because you have that experience and the passion behind it. So I love it. Um, but yeah, tell us more about these interviews then. That must have been very exciting and you probably learned some very surprising facts, right?
I did. It's funny, one of the common questions that I'm asked is, how did you find, so many people who wanted to talk to you? How did you do that? And that was the easiest part. Because the truth is this is actually a really underrepresented voice out there in the world. Adoptees don't often get to just talk about what it is to have been adopted and what that means to them in their lives. Adoptive parents, again, everyone sees this really shiny, happy veneer. It is literally shiny, happy people. And they think every bit, oh, that's great. Isn't that wonderful? Blah, blah, blah. And they go on with their day. And then you also have the voices of first parents, who are probably the least heard from in this sort of triad, if you will. And it was really easy to get them to talk because we haven't been heard from, and then again, I always had, a pre-interview conversation with everyone. And I just said, listen, this is just to explore and examine and flip open the underbelly, whatever that is for you, whether it's a great story, whether it's a challenging story, or most often a combination of both. Whatever it is, let's talk. And so that just sort of became its own animal and its own machine. And people said so many, there's so much diversity out there.
There really is. Yeah, I guess would you say that's the most surprising thing, kind of like all the different diverse experiences that, came out of it?
I would say that no matter how much happiness there is often a very real layer of pain.
Mm.
I would
And I
say,
guess,
yeah, like, and it's unacknowledged pain.
yeah, and that's kind of like how you mentioned in your book that many of them suppress their feelings and their pain.
Mhm,
So you'd say like a good majority of them doesn't, unfortunately. They just put on a happy face and don't quite like to talk about it then.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And, as human beings, remember, we pay that, as I quote Jennifer Joy Phoenix here on this. It's like we pay a very high interest rate on things left unexplored and unexamined.
Understood. Right. So, speaking of unexamined, I mean, your book does dive into some ethical concerns as well. And not to spoil anything for the listeners today, because I'm sure you could only imagine a book of this type. There's so much going on in the adoption world that, there is some, ethical concerns. What were some of the things that you found in your research?
Yeah, those are hard. I'm going to be honest with you. I had no idea that adoption in America functions as much like an industry as it does. In fact, our child welfare industry in the United States is a $24 billion a year industry. And when you quote that, you're quoting both the services within foster care as well as, the private infant adoption industry. But just to unfortunately pull out here and pick at the threads sort of from the infant adoption industry, it's a business. And we're pretty much the only nation on earth, unfortunately, that has done that. And as an adoptee, seated in the chair, knowing that, my mother relinquished me because of cultural stigma. And we all, I think, sit here and think, well, those days are over. And to find out that we're still, we're still having the same conversations. We're still having women who feel resourceless, who feel unsupported, and in their last final desperate attempt to try to make sure that they can give their child the best life or the life that they want them to have, they are actually pondering giving their child to someone else to raise. And, let us be clear, no one, no one wants to see a child being abused or neglected or unsafe. No one wants that. But within infant adoption, we've created, unfortunately, an industry that, because there is very little to no federal oversight, it's practiced 50 different ways in 50 different states with 50 different sets of regulations. And while they're similar, they're also actually staggeringly diverse within some of the minutia of the way that these things are handled. And we have about 18 to 20,000 private infant adoptions that happen each year in the US. And what you end up with are primarily women who are struggling for resources. That was what I found in my research. That has also been found in other recent research on who relinquishing parents are these days. And so if it's driven by resources, they're going into an adoption agency. Well, I'm not saying that all adoption agencies or attorneys or whatever are, automatically diabolical. I'm saying that that's their job. Their job is to facilitate adoptions, and an adoption requires a relinquishment. And then you also have adoptive parents who are frankly, you know, there don't appear to be as many guardrails on some of the practices that are out there for private attorneys and private agencies. I just don't think that there's sufficient oversight. And so I sort of feel like adoptive parents get taken advantage of because, the costs of an adoption are 40, 50, 60, sometimes $70,000, for a private infant adoption. That's crazy. and they're taking this huge financial risk. And then you have a woman who is seeking resources. Well, doesn't aren't we
Yeah.
working at cross purposes here?
Yeah, no, of course.
And then, let's not forget that the whole thing is supposed to be for my welfare, right? It's actually supposed to be for my benefit and my welfare. And I'm not really sure that that becomes a part of the equation at all then. And I think we think we're doing the right things, but I also think that we're failing. And I think that we have an industry that has a very real for-profit motive operating within it. And really, like I said, insufficient guardrails and insufficient oversight on it. And so this just gets scary. It just does. And I didn't know that when I started this research. I did not know that. So,
Yeah, no, I understand completely. So it kind of seems like you walked into, I guess you'd say like a bee's nest of information that you never would have thought about until you did, being that your own experience was generally positive. So it must have been very like heartbreaking to hear these stories from others. And that's why I said in the beginning, it's something that you have to be strong to really take and put onto the page in such a vulnerable way, in a way that also relays the information authentically. So I guess my next question is about that writing process. Did you have any strategies that you employed to, ensure that even though the content is sensitive and there's a lot going on, how did you put it across so just in a relatable way just to connect with everybody?
oh, thanks. Um, whew. Yeah,
A little
that's
bit.
a big question. I mean, it's
Yeah. What was your process like? I guess is what I'm asking in a more general sense.
sure. I mean, after each and every interview, I definitely went through the transcript and, I had a system of literally like color coding, like, this is related to this topic or that topic or that topic, and tried to keep a really solid running log on the types of information that I was receiving. And then I would have the research. And so as I would be writing along in my chapters, and the book is divided primarily with the first, meat of those sections. You have one whole section that is like 7 or 8 chapters dedicated to adoptee point of view. And then you have another 7 or 8 chapters dedicated to birth parents and their points of view. And then the same with adoptive parents. And so I'd have all of the research, piled into one Google Doc, and then I'd go back in and reread and again highlight like what are the primary directions, what are the primary challenges, what are the primary benefits and struggles, and what are the wins, where are we winning and where are we not, and try to coalesce that by topic and then go back into the stories and see where the stories would either enhance or occasionally even contradict, but usually it was a matter of simply enhancing because again, researchers are talking to people, people are telling them their stories, and so we end up in the same place. And so it became like a braid. I would be picking up one part and laying it over the other and over the other and over the other, and so that's just kind of how they came in as I divided out by topic.
Exactly. So I like that metaphor, kind of like a braid. That's interesting. That's the first time I've heard that one, but I like it. It's a great way to kind of put it. And that's a wonderful process. And I'm sure just it did take you 3 years to write all this. So I'm sure that, that's why it was such a carefully made braid because you were taking your time with it, make sure it was done correctly. So great. And I guess, backing up on that, you've actually hired additional researchers to help you to make sure that everything was correct. So tell me a little more about that. That's a unique approach as well.
Thanks. Yeah, boy, in 2021 is when I kind of got the idea that I was going to do this. I started, making notations, looking at, other resources and bibliographies, talking to a few learned professionals that I knew. By early 2022, got super serious about it and realized very quickly that, oh my God, if I was going to actually read through all of this research, I'd still be doing that right now, um, and I went, there's no way. I don't want to wait this long. There's too much to do. There's too much to say. And so it was, it was out here in at, UNLV, at my doorstep. I went on to I don't know, there's this app anymore that you use because everything is an app. So there's this app that you use on college campuses when you want to post either, volunteer work or paid work. And it's actually really, really helpful. It helps you dig in, by interest, by, what the student major is, like what are the most suitable majors for your project and that kind of thing. So it was really actually very helpful. I think it's called Handshake. That's what it is.
Okay.
Um, and so I filled all of that out and had written I'd started doing the platform building and all the things that we authors are supposed to be doing, right? So I had a blog that was starting to be written and shared some of the stories from the early interviews that I did. And I knew I wanted probably psychology or psychology adjacent, given the topic, or maybe political science, that kind of thing. And was really impressed with the candidates that I got. And then I settled on these two wonderful young ladies, and then we just dug in. I mean, I couldn't afford to pay them much. I couldn't afford to pay them for a whole lot of work, but even still, like over the year and a half that we worked together, these two very fine young women, Sadie Hinson and Alana Bayless, um, went out and bird dogged, the research and would come back. We would, meet up periodically. They would summarize things, provide me all of the links and all of that sort of stuff. And so that was extremely helpful.
Right. Well, that's a really cool resource. Thank you for sharing the link to it too. We'll put the link in the description box of this podcast today, guys, so you can click on over and learn yourself. As authors, we can always use more resources. People try to just do everything themselves, but when you have a team by your side, especially of researchers, I mean, that's incredible. I've heard of co-authors. I've never heard of co-researchers. So that's really cool. It's handshake.com, was it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And again, you can I give them full credit too on my website. You can see the two gals there. So
I love that. Well, that's really cool. And your website you mentioned, what might that be and how can we, get connected to that?
sure, adoptionparadox.com. It's real simple.
Nice
Uh,
to meet you.
yeah, and you can see news, you can see blog posts, happenings, reviews, all the things. Sign up for my newsletter. But yeah, you can also see the
Yeah.
two researchers because they deserve that credit. So
I love that. It's great to just see you had, your mission was there and you just did what you had to do to make sure it was authentically said, that all the information was there and accurate. It didn't matter who worked on it, doesn't matter whatever, but you're saying that giving the respect to them by giving them the credit. It's lovely what you've done. So now that this book is out there, I guess I have to ask what's next? What's your next move?
oh gosh. Let's see. Change the narrative on adoption. I don't know. It's a small thing. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, I really do, just want to keep writing, keep sharing resources, because there is activism to be done. I think that there is change to be made. There are real live relevant issues happening right now and in every day. And, adoptees or those, affected by adoption, I think are actually a much more sizable number in our population than people realize. I remember being asked early on, like, well, who's your target market, for this book? And it's like, well, we got 5 million adopted adults in America right now.
Just those
That's
people,
a good start,
yeah.
and all of those people have parents on both sides. So we got duals on there. And one of the things too that I was committed to doing in this book is I do have two chapters on foster care. So then
Mhm.
when you add in foster care, then that number keeps growing. And so, you know, I will say that this book is definitely aimed at any family that has adoption or foster care in its midst. And that's what I'm hopeful to try to do is to, let people know that they're not alone if this is their journey. And that is on all sides. And to help them understand that they're not alone, that there's resources. And so I think that that can happen. And so that's what I'm just going to continue to work on is that.
Right, exactly. So I love that. And I guess we can stay up to date by looking at your website too to see like what new projects you're working on and, just anything else that might be possible. So Gene Wild, oh, sorry, I was going to say genewilder.com. That is not correct. It's adoptionparadox.com.
Yes.
Yes. So we're going to put that in the description box of this podcast today. No confusion. Just go to the description box and click on it. So as we begin to wrap up today, I'm curious to know, do you have any last bits of advice to the listeners today? Anything that they should be taking with them as they progress on their own authorship journey?
Oh, their authorship journey. Boy, I'm
Or,
just gonna
or
say,
in the adoption world too, perhaps there's people who have been adopted, interested in writing as well. What would you say to them?
sure. For writing in general, I'm gonna just say, keep at it. Make sure that you get it. Make sure that you remember the joy in it, but also get good critique and good help and good support and learn a lot, and then keep learning more, because that journey never ends to try to improve your craft. I learn and rehearse and revise, every day. To those who are members of adoption or looked after children or looked after families or anyone who has any of this anywhere in your midst, writing is incredibly healing. It is an incredibly healing exercise to, even if it's just journaling, to put your thoughts down on paper and to try to distill them and to try to crystallize them is well worth anyone's time. And then I think so many people in our world and in our population feel like, oh, they're the only ones. I'm the only one who thinks these thoughts. I'm the only one who feels these, this way or has had this experience. And I think what people need so much right now is connection and to understand that they're not alone. And that while other stories might be, you know, different than yours. And one of the things that we will talk about and even sort of chuckle about in terms of support groups, it's like, we're not in the trauma Olympics here, air quotes around that, right? Like, don't
Right.
compare your situation to others because your story is your story and it matters. It always matters. And so, find the pace and the peace of that and hopefully some solace. And then don't stay in isolation because there's lots of support out there.
Right. Yeah, there really is. And I love that you said that because, like, people think that they're alone, they don't know what to do. But I think the writing world is definitely a place that makes you feel differently. You pick up a book like yours, for example, you've walked a very similar path as them, or at least the people we've interviewed. So amazing. I love that piece of advice. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for coming on the show. It's been a really awesome conversation. And we've learned a ton about you and the adoption world. And guys, if you're interested in learning more, well, check out the Adoption Paradox. We're going to put the links in the description box so you can click on over and get a copy for yourselves. So thank you so much for coming on, Jean.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to be here.
Of course. Yeah. And everybody, if you're inspired by this conversation, again, check out the Adoption Paradox. And if you want to write your own story, well, Authors on Mission also has a ton of resources for you. We have ghostwriters and editors and marketers, anything you can imagine to help you get your story out there. Because, like Jean said, you're not alone. If you share your story with others, well, you never know the communities you're going to be involved in. So, on that note, please continue to write. Keep writing, keep reading, and keep inspiring. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast. That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.